Welcome to Media Mystics, a podcast encouraging encounters with Christ through film, music, poetry, video games, and all mediums of inspiring art. Your hosts are Charlie and Thomas, two men on a quest to grow closer to God and illuminate our culture. Today we explore the film La La Land. While we discuss these works of art from a Catholic perspective, the views on this podcast are our own and not official perspectives of the Catholic Church. Views on these works may vary, and we do not endorse every message of these works. Personal discernment is advised. Join us as we seek to become Media Mystics.
Welcome to the Media Mystics podcast. I'm Thomas and this is Charlie. Today we're talking about
La La Land.
La 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 Land.
Which, by the way, the title, this is the third time that I've seen the movie, just finished it, and was finally trying to pay attention to the title, and never realized that La La Land was a pseudonym for Los Angeles.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding me right now?
Yeah, so apparently LA, the name for it is La La Land. So the title, or people use that kind of to express, if someone's living in La La Land, they're a person who's not living in reality.
But also somebody who's living in LA.
And I think that they use that title to joke about LA because it's also a city of film where people go out there and maybe they're not actually living in reality. And plus, this is a musical and you singing the la 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 la. So I think it's like a multi-faceted title that I was like, how could you not name it La La Land after that?
Done.
I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Well done. Yeah, we're here for it.
I'm excited to talk about this. Jump right in. The opening song. I just was intrigued by. I loved that song, and previously when I'd listened to it, I was like, "Wow, that's an amazing dance number." I love the dancing, out in public with people, just all these strangers meeting each other and doing art is kind of a cool little thing they do on the what is it, the
freeway.
The freeway of what's the song is Another Day of Sun.
Another Day of Sun.
And man, never paid attention to how foreshadowing the lyrics of that song are, but at least the ones that stuck out to me that I thought was just kind of helped me ground myself in a thesis of this movie was the opening lyrics are, the woman sings, "I think about that day I left him at Greyhound Station west of Santa Fe. We were 17, but he was sweet and it was true. Still, I did what I had to do because I just knew." And she continues talking and is talking about making it on the big screen. And she says, "Without a nickel to my name, hopped a bus, here I came. Could be brave or just insane. We'll have to see. 'Cause maybe in that sleepy town, he'll sit one day, the lights are down. He'll see my face and think of how he used to know me."
Dang.
I don't know. It's
pretty intense.
Quite an intense summary of the plot.
Yeah.
In a way that I didn't ever really notice the first couple times
and it's
watched this.
Kind of harrowing when you just read the lyrics like
Say
that.
More.
As opposed to they're like, "Another Day of Sun." It's very happy-go-lucky, and what you just read is just whoa, maybe he'll remember me when he sits down in that cafe or whatever.
Yeah, it's got some more depth to the lyrics. I love when songs do that and have I don't know, even a deeper, darker meaning, but set to a very joyful tone. Owl City is an artist that I think does that really well. He takes his really sad, sort of depressing themes, but sets them to a hopeful, bright music, and it's captivating.
Yeah, true.
Anyways, that's just the opening title I was very impressed with. But what are some themes?
Yeah,
you're
maybe to just sing the praises of La La Land for a little bit longer. Another Day of Sun, it's an incredible song.
Incredible song.
It introduces so well traffic, but also color theory.
Oh man.
And oh my
so
God,
good.
I was so impressed this whole movie by color theory that I was just this movie doesn't need to have music. And it would still be good just because the colors are so vivid.
When cinematographers talking about making every
beautiful
shot of a movie a painting, that's La La Land.
This was actually just it.
It's amazing. Yeah. The colors are just amazing. And I've only taken one color theory class in my life, and I only know extraordinary basics of color theory. But I was like, man, if I really was a cinematographer or a storyteller and wanted to use lighting well, that is quite a case study.
Yeah, for sure. La La Land has won an incredible number of awards. It's won 7 or 8 Golden Globes. It's won 6 or 7 Academy Awards. It's also something I learned today is that it was nominated for something in Russia. I don't really follow Russian film critics, but
I think a power to the
But, like,
color.
it's just like an incredible film,
It is an
widely
incredible film.
acclaimed.
And I think that even the first couple times I'd seen this movie, like if you asked me what I knew about it, I remembered kind of like the ending scene and the fact that it was beautiful. Like those are some of the first things that struck me was just like the dancing, the colors, and the final scene. It took me like a couple of watches now to really pick up. There's so much happening so quickly and so many notes I could have written. But I was just intrigued to recognize how like the visuals were so captivating that I remembered that very much so after my first watch.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of a special film in this regard. It's like, I don't think we've reviewed any films that are just like really, really bad. But like this is just like a film that's like particularly beautiful, and just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
2016 film.
Good job, cinematographers.
Somebody. I don't know who.
Costume design, all of it. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Dancing. Oh my gosh. Some themes. What themes stand out to you from a Catholic perspective to explore?
Yeah, so there's lots of different themes in here. So as with any musical, like the music is going to like paint a lot of the central themes. And if like you kind of like close your eyes and you think of like what happened in La La Land and like what the music was doing, the primary theme that I would say is longing.
Mm-hmm.
And like the idea of longing and longing for each other and longing for a better future, longing for your dreams. It's just longing all over the place, which is like a kind of nostalgia. And it's like a kind of, there's lots going on with longing. And it's exemplified by that key, piano piece, Mia and Sebastian's theme, which is like,
that's good. Nice job.
Yeah, I think that was even on pitch. You're welcome, YouTube. So
you're gonna get us copyright claims now.
Oh no! I had more than 3 notes in a row.
Yeah, I like that you draw that theme out. I think that longing is well expressed in this film. It hits that very strongly and brings up a lot of questions about it. What did you want to talk about with that longing?
Yeah, I guess like, what did you see the main characters longing for, and was that longing good for them?
I think their longings change. I see them longing initially for a career, for success, for, a livelihood, to be able to sustain themselves with their art. And both of them kind of meet each other with those similar longings, just for different mediums. And I think the longings change. The longings change for one another, for relationship. And then that longing towards the end of the film kind of becomes a nostalgic longing back to like the what if sort of longing of like what could have been. And then kind of a letting go of that. So I think that there's various beats of longing throughout the film and different aspects that you could explore.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we can maybe summarize them as like career, romance, and the past.
And probably identity. There's a little bit of a hit that I like in the that I never really noticed when her friends go out to that party and they're at like the dude that does the awesome flip twist on beat into the pool to kickstart the song. If you remember the moment I'm talking about, that was just like, man, I was it's like, dope. Whoever that gymnast was who's doing that, I mean, like, incredible. That was just amazingly done. But the lyrics there in that song are talking about, someone in the crowd, like, will take you where you want to go and kind of seems like will help you find your dreams and your goals. And like will help you find you a little bit is kind of the takeaway that I had from that song. And on the one hand, I was like, oh man, but another person is not going to satisfy you. Like they're not going to answer all your longings. But like they can certainly be a boon and a help towards that. And we're made for community and made for relationship. So I thought that there was also an identity piece of kind of her finding herself in relationship was good. Yeah,
I would agree. And I would say that like, as we are kind of like looking at this as like a kind of cultural thing is like, like for her going to that party was who's the person there that's going to give me the job that I need, right? I was very much getting like a professional, like, oh, I'm going there to audition for a film, right? And or to meet somebody who will want me to audition for their film and I'll get my big break and everything. And so there's a kind of like sense in which, like, as we look at that scene, like, yeah, I'm going to meet somebody in the crowd who is going to have the power to make my dreams happen. But I also think that as we look at the course of the movie, there's a sense it's like, no, the main characters are very unique, and like nobody is going to make their dreams happen but them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also heard that song as like not only just like, is there maybe somebody in the crowd professionally who can take me where I want to go, but like, is there a romance that I can find that will also like help
maybe
me
so.
discover me? And I feel like it was both for me of how I saw it and kind of her just wistful looking into the mirror as they bring down the lights and do this awesome just spotlight lighting that they keep doing throughout the film is super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's like a good theme to touch on too, is just like as we look at like Christian relationships, there's like a general sense in relationships that like there's somebody in the crowd, or there's some fish in the sea out there for me that like is going to be the thing that makes the difference in my life and makes my life makes my life worth it. What do you think of that?
I think something, at least, I don't know if this directly answers your question, but it reminded me of this thought of sometimes when I go to like a party or like a social function, I can sometimes have in the back of my mind like what my longing is to get out of this function. Like, just to speak like currently, I'm on summer break right now, and with our podcast, I'm wanting to explore a lot more video games. So I've been playing some more video games, and I recently just I traded actually my Xbox for a PlayStation. I found a guy that just did like a free trade on Facebook Marketplace, which is super cool.
Nice.
So I have a PlayStation now, and there's so many games, story games that are incredible that I've never been able to play because I haven't had a PlayStation. And I'm loving it, but I'm wanting somebody to share that with, like another gamer who is loving the games that I love, like I love them, and can share them, and like to find brotherly camaraderie with a hobby I enjoy. Because throughout my life, I think sometimes I've had that, and sometimes like I'll find guys that love games, but they've already got their little crowd, and they play with these 3 guys all the time, and like every time I reach out to play games, they're unavailable, or like they love games I don't love. So finding somebody who's had like a constant camaraderie in that thing I love has actually been kind of like hard to maintain consistently.
There's a kind of lack
life.
of intimacy
and I would say with that lack of intimacy, like me desiring that brotherly intimacy with a shared beautiful hobby, sometimes I think I'm guilty of going into a social function and kind of like just hoping or looking for that person that's going to kind of fulfill that need. And it can be a damage in that I am no longer just loving the person for loving the person. And there can be a temptation that if I recognize the person I'm talking to is not interested in the thing I'm interested in, and they're not going to satisfy what I want, like I might want to move away and go find somebody else.
Yeah.
And that can be dangerous in that like I'm no longer just loving the person and receiving them and supporting them and what are their needs and how can I speak to this person in conversation. It can become kind of a selfish, I'm here at this function to find what I need. Not that that's like bad to like search for your needs. That's
it's
not my point. But it has to be
itself.
balanced in I'm aware of that, but I'm also going to be in community.
Treat this person as an end in themselves.
Yeah, not
like,
to treat them as like
see who they are rather than what they can do for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I see that that's kind of a danger that I see in that like somewhere in the crowd and kind of throughout the gist of this movie is just the sole desire for I'm going to have my dreams and desires met can be damaging. And it sort of actually does for the two of them. It sort of leads them apart from each other. To talk on that more later, but that's just like a theme that I was exploring in myself, and I think I wanted to share that too, because as we're talking about longing here, it need not only apply to romantic relationships, while it certainly does, certainly also to friendship, and I would say also like the Lord has blessed me in that desire I've been looking for in ways that like I didn't know that I like. He's surprised me also, and that, like my fiance now has recently started playing Horizon Zero Dawn with me.
That's wild.
She just like was playing it for a few hours like by herself at home, and I was just like, "This is amazing." I was like, "She's loving this game that I want," and like she has other games that she really likes, and that was like the first one that I found like me and her both are really loving the same game. She has other games that she's really enjoyed and stuff. So the Lord has been delivering that even through like a romantic relationship. So, anyways, just
and I think maybe you just like touch on a couple of things there. Is just like. Yeah, and like you even see in your romantic relationship this like kind of shared intimacy about like you both see some kind of good thing out there that like like kind of like some kind of story that unites you.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's like really valuable. So like as we're like looking for like romantic relationships or just relationships of any kind, like there ought to be some kind of intimacy about like some kind of shared vision of good, shared vision of beauty or truth or experience. And that's like what gets us hyped to hang with people, right?
Yeah.
Like yeah, whether it be like the sport that we play or whether it be the music that we listen to, like we talk about like, oh, we make friends with shared interests. No, I think it's something a little bit deeper. It's like we make friends with people who see the world in the same way because of our interests. And like that's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
And so
Episode to come on Horizon Zero Dawn video game. Lots of good, lots of bad. Plug for that later.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Can I share just like a quote that I was thinking of
Please.
when I was looking at Mia and Sebastian and like, wow, what a relationship. I was looking at Mia and Sebastian in this movie and I was like very excited for them. And I was really excited about like, I was very invested in like them accomplishing their dreams and like being with each other and all these things. But like this theme of desire made me think of a quote from St. Augustine.
Okay.
That I didn't know St. Augustine. Like every time like I think like St. Augustine or St. Thomas Aquinas couldn't have said like more things. Like I'm like, I've heard it all already. No, there's just more. But I learned this from the chaplain at our school this year, this quote. The entire life of a good Christian is in fact an exercise in holy desire. You do not yet see what you long for, but the very act of desiring prepares you so that when he comes, you may see and be utterly satisfied. And so as I like think about like why I like this movie so much, which I do a lot, and like as I think about like Mia and Sebastian, I kind of like thank God for just like desire in my life that motivates me to do things that like otherwise would be difficult to do. But just like desire in general, because I know that like whatever I'm desiring, like it's really like a practice in like desiring him and desiring the Lord. And so, yeah, like, did we see like a direct faith aspect for me and Sebastian in the movie? No, we didn't. But is there a sense in which like them like really wanting to like be able to make sacrifices to get what they dream of? Is there a sense that we look in that and we're like, that's very exciting and that's very good and there's something good about that? I think so. And I think like something to teach us too. Whether or not they should have made the decisions that they did in the end, like I'm not judging that necessarily at this point.
But that there's an honor in the sacrifices they are making to be able to seek out their desires.
Yeah, to seek out their desires and to be true to who they perceive themselves to be.
Like when he sells out kind of his dream for the jazz club to play with the Messengers jazz band. Like that there's kind of a but that's less beautiful, you see, because like he's not like he could be making maybe other sacrifices to continue to have his desires ultimately fulfilled, as opposed to kind of eradicating those desires.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like what, and I don't think there's a right answer. Like, was his call good in that scenario? And that's what, like, Mia was like, hey man, like you're kind of a sellout. And he's like, I'm not a sellout. I'm just trying to get my dream to happen.
Yeah.
You know, it was kind of heartbreaking seeing that.
And
argument.
I think there's a whole other aspect to like, I think the sacrifice that's made towards desire. And I think it's just this is kind of my primary question that I explore with this, is their desires for their careers, I think ultimately led them apart from each other. Maybe it was just, circumstances. She moved and whatever else. But like, if I was ever to look to my fiance right now and she got like some kind of job offer or whatever, like to do the thing she's always been looking to do, and it was just incredible, and it was going to be overseas, and maybe it's different because I guess in the film they weren't engaged, but they were living together. So I mean, it's like they had a deep intimacy. If she ever came to me and was like, where are we at, with this offer, I certainly would never have said, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Like I would have said, I don't know what we're gonna do with the job right now, but I'm committed to you, and I'm here, and like I'm yours, and like we're gonna if we can make this dream happen, and maybe I need to make some sacrifices, right? I'm a teacher, maybe I can go teach in Europe where your job offer is, right?
Yeah.
And even in the wistful end of the movie where they show the what if scenes, they even show him like having the jazz club, over in Europe or whatever. I think that there was a lack that I saw of sacrifice to support, in some ways, the relationship. Because there were certain sacrifices that were definitely made for each person. Like he was very interested in her dream and supporting her dream, and that was beautiful. And she makes a lot of like that, conversation at dinner where she's like, "You're kind of being a sellout." Like there's some moments where she's really supporting his dream, and there's a beautiful,
even though it was hard for him to
mission.
Hear,
yeah, even though it was difficult, but I still have this question of like,
were they making the right choices?
Yeah,
right sacrifices.
Were you prioritizing your individual desires above the need for community? And this is really on the nose for me because I just finished listening to another podcast episode that I thought was absolutely amazing.
We're about to advertise for another podcast.
Absolutely.
And the podcast is called?
Is The Spillover with Alex Clark. And there was an episode on like the nuclear family.
Okay.
And it was just talking about, the thesis of that was basically that like the nuclear family being just like mom, dad, kids is like too small of a vision of the family, and it was trying to extend that to kind of a biblical view of like generations of family. And I think that they summarized it well. And like the guest, I can't remember his name, but I'll tag it in the show notes. He was basically like, if you looked in like the 1950s, 60s, and said, "What's your vision of family? Like what's the picture hanging over your fireplace? Who's in it?" Like there might be like 8 people in it, like mom, dad, kids, and maybe like 1 or 2 others. But if you ask somebody like 2,000 years ago, or like somebody in like a Jewish heritage, like what does your family look like? What's the picture hanging over your fireplace? There's like 72 people in it, like 80 people, because it's such a generational view of the family that is all so together. And he just really spoke into like the mission of family. And one thing that I really liked in that podcast was he was talking about how like families, and whether this is biological family, church family, friendship family, whatever that might be for you, making like a common mission. And so he talked about like the detriment of like, if dad has a mission and he's trying to just get everybody to do dad's mission, like it can kind of be defeating a little bit. And he gave this beautiful like worksheet that I think he has available on his website. It was basically like, take stock inventory of your family, whether that's biological or whatever it is, the people in your life. What are their gifts? What are their talents? What are they good at? What do they need to grow in? How can the family help them? And how can they help us? And then like work them into the common mission of the family. Yeah. And like, if you have an individual mission, if dad has something, like, don't just throw that on them, but like make it a communal thing. He talked about, I think, I listened to multiple episodes, so I could be crossing multiple things over, but they were talking about how he goes and gives talks. One of the guests on her podcast was talking about how he goes and gives talks, and he used to just kind of be like, "Okay, dad's leaving, I'll be back on Friday after this talk or whatever." And the family was frustrated and upset, and just like it was like difficult that he was kind of like leaving and then coming back into the family, and it was just tension. And he just kind of changed.
Makes a lot of sense.
He changed his language, I think, to say eventually like, "Okay, like dad's going to do this. Like we are on mission to send dad out as a missionary. So while we are sending him out, like, what are you doing? Like, well, you're going to be praying for dad, and you're going to be doing this." And he just made his mission as a speaker a communal mission of the family and changed the language. And he would ask the kids like, "Hey, I got an offer to go and like have this talk in Dallas. What do you think about it?" I'm not necessarily saying that you're making the decision, because I'm still the father and the parent of the household, but he included them in the mission. All of that is just to try to summarize what they were talking about making a communal mission.
I like that a lot.
And I think that I lost that in La La Land, in that she had her mission, he had his, and sad to say, they just didn't come together. Sometimes maybe that's just going to happen when you're dating, but when you're like really invested in a person and you're like, "This is the person I love," you're gonna choose them, and you're gonna orient, I think, your mission to include them and the family and support, like that your career would not damage that. I could see a damage here in
maybe
that.
to kind of hop in and say, like, one of the things that I really like about that example you gave from this other podcast, and it's called The Spillover.
The Spillover with Alex Clark. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've not heard of it before. That's
It's
cool.
pretty good. It's really good.
But something I really liked about that is like we see a lot of like with like our male heads of families, like our fathers and yeah, we see this kind of problem that like they work so hard at like their job, and then they come home and they're just like toasted, right? And that doesn't mean on drugs. That means like sorry,
they have no energy for the kids, for the wife, or anything.
They're just they come home and like they're kind of zombies. And I've definitely felt that in my own life too. Is like there's sometimes when like I'm at my job and I'm like, my job is super engaging. Like I'm a theology teacher. Like I have to work really hard to try to get every kid to understand as much as I can. But like I will get home at the end of the day and I'll just be like totally tired. And then my relationships at home with my girlfriend or my parents or whoever it might be, like those suffer as a result of like me being like, my real mission today was at school, and then you guys get the leftovers.
Yeah.
And like that like is not the way that we're supposed to be, right? Like so I really like this kind of common understanding of mission and missioning together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will say about like me and Sebastian though, to kind of bring it back over to La La Land, like, yeah, they're not necessarily, I would say that, are they allowed to have their own individual missions that don't involve each other though? What do you think?
That's interesting.
Like, yeah, because it's like, maybe there's a Christian response to that. Maybe there's not.
The way that I would reply is, I just, me and my fiance Allie have read, I've read portions, she's read the whole thing, but we've both taken a theme from this book called A Severe Mercy, in which they talk about the principle of sharing. And the goal is that the couple would share so many things of their life, their hobbies, their interests, their missions, whatever it is. If you like it, there's something objectively likable about it, so I will learn to like that too. And they take it
That's
as
really
like they take it as a mission to say every aspect of our life will be a thing that will bind us together, and it won't turn into this like, oh, he's going to do his thing, I'm going to do my thing, and to the point that it like we're separating. I think a huge caveat to all of that is like that doesn't mean like every time I go hang out with the guys, she has to be there, you know? Like it's not that kind of thing, but it's like, well, if I like video games, she can find something to appreciate in
whatever the good is,
yes,
needs to be able to be communicated and made an agent of communion.
And that was shown amazingly well, I think, with his love for jazz.
Yeah.
Like that principle of sharing where she was like, I hate jazz. And he was like, what are you doing right now? And then they go to a jazz club and he shows her the beauty and she learns to love what he loves. That's like the principle of sharing that I think brings them together.
Yeah, that was awesome.
And I think there is always that balance of like, is there a space in which like I then have my separate individual mission that you are not in? I don't know. You know, I guess I could only speak out of my personal experience of like,
yeah,
with my fiance, she's a nurse. I'm not a nurse. I'm a theology teacher, and she's like not currently a theology teacher. But she supports me a lot in how I talk about things and my lesson plans. And she comes home and teaches me so much stuff. And she's got me changing my diet and my water choices and so many things that like I am participating in her mission, and it's not separate from me. But I don't go to her job, you know, and like pretend like I know what I'm doing. So I feel like there's a balance, but it shouldn't ever be. That's
shouldn't
just
ever
the thing
be
she does.
A balance, that's separation.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting, and I think this is like definitely something for our like, for those of our listeners who are like still like in the mode of discernment is like, if you're the kind of person, maybe admit this is not advice. This is a questioning point. If you're the kind of person that's utterly consumed by a specific mission and like it seems to negate like the involvement of like somebody that intimately, then like maybe marriage isn't your vocation, right? Maybe it's something like religious life or like priesthood or whatever, or consecrated single life. But like for like the however much percent of us like that are getting married, like that's like a pretty high need to have like mission intimacy. Because if you're ever like coming home and like let's say that you're Charlie and you're coming home from your theology teacher job and you're just like, yeah, like my job was the most important thing that I did today and I can't share it with my family because they just won't understand. Like you are setting yourself up for a life of very much loneliness. Yeah. Right. And like it's definitely possible that your mission is somewhere out there rather than to a specific person. That's a legitimate expression of vocation. But we need to be careful about like how we're like, if we are so mission focused that there's not room, we need to examine the way that we're loving. And then we also need to say like, hey, like what is the vocation that like will help me with this mission? But oftentimes what's going on is we recognize our intimacy needs first and choose our vocation first, and then the mission kind of comes and flows from that. Yeah. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I had like
I don't know if people want free advice on this, but like it seems important.
Two thoughts come to mind of like one, I was also thinking kind of that religious life piece, because I think when I was discerning, I recognized all these dreams and desires I have, like Seb and Mia, and like I want to do a podcast. I'd love to like make film or video games and so many things that are kind of my mission. That I think I pondered for a bit of like, oh, am I called to like, really give my fervor to that? Because I would have more independence and freedom to do that if I chose like a vocation apart from maybe like a
single vocation,
perhaps. Yeah. But also granted, those vocations have so many responsibilities. Like if I'd chosen like priesthood or something, I'm not going to be able to go and just do all the film and whatever I want. Like I've got people
very
in a
few priest podcasters. Yeah.
But I do actually know a couple. I have some friends that just started one, I think called like A Normal Christian Life. Anyways, check out Michael and Chris Trummer.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, they started a podcast.
They're fun.
Father Chris, Father Michael.
Especially one of them, but I'll never tell you. Just kidding. You guys are both great.
We love you both so much. But I would caveat, I think, all of that, because I found in finding Allie and giving my life to her, I think the Lord was teaching me, Charlie, while I'm so glad you have these passions for film and podcast and media and stuff, relationship and love is your primary mission. And so the gift of family actually, I think, is revealing Christ to me in a deeper way, in that it's tempering myself, and that, oh, I can't just go and work on my podcast for as many hours of the day as I want because I need to love her and people around me, is actually good. And I think it teaches me not to just be the I'm going to do my mission guy. And it helps me reorient myself into love and family, which I think is also very good. So if you have a passion for like some kind of great work for the world, I wouldn't say, that automatically equals I must pursue that individually, because that could also be that could be very prideful, and that you lose, like you said, family and relationship, whereas family and marriage could also kind of balance you. And I have another point on that to make in a moment. And the final point I would say too of like religious life is I feel like Mother Teresa would step in, and she would also, there's a beautiful quote she has where she says like, we are not social workers, rather we are like missionaries at the heart of the world. And I feel like there's a theme within religious life that I've come to grasp, which is our primary purpose of being religious is not just to do mission and to do charity, but to be deeply intimate with Jesus Christ. And like our mission is Jesus, and that pours itself out into the world. But I think that C.S. Lewis has a great chapter in his book, The Great Divorce, where a social worker basically like comes to heaven and is offered to enter heaven. And there's this like critique of a social worker who has lost her love for Christ and love for helping people and replaced it with her desire for just a mission to like do work. And I thought that was a really interesting dichotomy that he puts up, is like to make sure we're not putting mission and work like above love and relationship. That's all I'll say to that. But I think that that's like a helpful thing if you're going to be discerning. I think there could be people out there that become so prideful and they're like, I'm going to do great work for the world, so I'll just take the single route so I have more time, and they could lose out on relationship. I think there's something to discern there.
Yeah, and I think that's very true. Like, And I think all the great saints would agree, and all the tradition of the church would agree. Like if your life is first and foremost not about love and loving the one who loves, like you've missed the point.
Yeah.
Right. And like no matter what your mission is, like it's gotta be to grow in love.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that you love other people, both in terms of virtue and allowing God to act supernaturally through you to love.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, would totally agree. But would also just like make that a point of question for you and for me and for like people that are watching, like what are your great loves, and like what is the thing that like animates you to a mission, but like is it tied correctly to Jesus and to the people who are he is seemingly putting in your life to sanctify you, and that he wants them to be there for your sake.
Blessed Carlo Acutis, just last night, it was announced, I think through like a vote of the cardinals, and Pope Francis is going to be moving towards canonization of sainthood, which is awesome.
We're pumped about that.
We love it. And I think he's a man that I'd look to, of like most people would talk about him, and I would talk about him as a man who like played video games and made a website cataloging, Eucharistic miracles. And that was like kind of part of his mission. But if you talk to him and really read him, like he's just so animated by love for the Eucharist.
Yeah.
And he talks about how deeply he loves Jesus and does not waste any minute of his time on anything that is not pleasing to Jesus. And so I think that like the saints like Carlo and others, or like Blessed James Alberione, another patron of this podcast, like he did work in the media, but like he didn't just love media. He loved Jesus Christ, and he wanted to express
Jesus. And it overflowed
Jesus,
into media.
And it overflowed into media, yeah. So I think that's an interesting balance that I could throw into La La Land is, from a Christian perspective, where is that love of Christ and discerning that into love of family, love of relationship, and like that balance of mission, family, Christ, faith is such a thing to pray about for your own particular life, and to have spiritual directors in your life that can help you answer those questions. Is good
for sure. And it's not just about like, once I find my vocation, then I can just do that thing. It's about this constant analysis, not an anxious analysis, but a constant analysis of like, how am I doing at loving Christ and then also fulfilling the mission that is seemingly in front of me. And which is why I was so excited about what you said about like, that guy who's like inviting his family into the mission. Because what was not happening, it wasn't him just like figuring it out and then figuring it out all before he got married and then started marriage perfect. No, he was married for a few years, he had kids, and then he realized that God was calling him to a greater kind of love of his family through involving them in his mission.
Yeah.
And and they were in for it, and that's like what's so exciting about that is like, there's a lot of invitations within our what we would call like primary vocation. Yeah.
And that was just an interesting theme within La La Land is, it produces a lot of questions for me. My heart was kind of broken the first time I watched it at seeing them not make it work.
Yeah.
And letting it sort of die. But I also recognize like there are times where like you're going to be discerning a relationship with somebody and like circumstances might just pull you apart too.
Yeah.
And that's the thing to discern.
That's just okay.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So brought forth a lot of questions in that to discuss. I don't think I have any clear answers, but I love that it produces a lot of thought.
Yeah, I would agree. Trying to look at my list here and see if there's anything else.
While you're taking a look at that, I would bring up, I think, to say more on the, maybe toward just the them making it big. And then I'd like to get to, I want to touch on two themes of them as like small artists and the final little what if dream sequence is the last two things I want to touch on.
Okay. Yeah, I like both of those topics. Let's do it.
And just briefly, I don't have too much to say on it, but I think a beautiful caveat to throw into all of this is I grew up deeply wanting, to be a filmmaker, to be a video game designer and all this. And I absolutely like get the scene of her at the beginning going into her audition and she walks out and there's like all these redheads and people that look just like her in the white blouse also here for the same role. And it's like, what are the odds? What are the odds you're going to make it big? And that was kind of defeating to me for a while of like, is this even worth it? You know? And I went to school for a little while in visual effects and was quickly just disillusioned of like, I'm going to be spending so much time on such a tiny part of this massive work that I just am like, I don't know if I'm feeling like, I don't know. It just doesn't feel right, or I'm accomplishing something. And I think just a caveat that I would throw in is if you're an artist, the call could also be to be an artist for your small circle of the world, and that you don't have to make it big.
That's a legitimate call.
That's a deeply legitimate call for many people. You know, the joy that a person, if you're a painter, you might not show up in like Paris museums, but man, your brother, your sister, your mom, or your friend might deeply be moved by the painting you give to them, and you've impacted their world, and that's sufficient. Like that's quite good. I'm in a musical right now at a small community theater here in Indianapolis, but they actually, it's actually like, the theater is amazing. It's the nicest theater I've ever been in. I've really only done theater since high school. I haven't done it since high school. So this is like actually kind of a large theater to me, but in the grand scheme of the world, it's small. It's not going to hit like New York.
Yeah.
No one will remember me or know me in like New York, but like to my friends and family and people here in this little part of Indiana, like it's a great night out. It's a fun thing and I like it. It's beautiful to do, and it's a side thing that I'm doing, and like there can still be joy in being a small artist, and that's necessary, and we need that. And I have at least found great joy in that I didn't choose art then as my career, but I've chosen another ministry as my career in teaching for now. And this podcast and other art that I've been doing like on the side is greatly rewarding to me, and I don't have to make millions with it to provide for my family. So I just wanted to make a note on that.
Yeah. And I would totally agree. Like if you actually like want to like put it in some kind of logical form, for those of you that are like, yeah, like that's nice, Charlie, but like your community theater is fine. No, it's good because why? Because, and we say this like in teaching too, if we've affected one person, it's worth it. Why? Because that one person is of infinite value. Because one person is of infinite value, no matter what we do, if it has the chance of affecting one person, that value echoes into eternity. You know, it's like kind of weird to think about.
Yeah.
And it's hard sometimes, especially like, I feel like just like in school, we're always like, we go through all these years of schooling and like, we're just like graded like A, B, C, D, F, you know? And like, there's a kind of sense in which when we go about our lives, when we go about like the different hobbies that we have, we're just like, yeah, A, B, C, D, F, you know, like I go play ultimate Frisbee, and that's not necessarily a mission. It's a vocation, but it's not necessarily a mission. But like, I'm going there and I am like third string ultimate Frisbee pick.
Sure.
And just like, yeah, like I'm not great, but like the fact is that like, I know that it does good for me to be there. Like it heals me physically and renews me emotionally and spiritually. Spiritually might be a little strong, but the fact that it's doing that for me means that God smiles at it, you know? And the fact that like I'm there making it possible for somebody else to be renewed in this way, God smiles at it. And if God smiles, it's like kind of a big deal, you know? And he smiles when his children are taken care of in terms of their needs of truth, goodness, beauty, and oneness.
Yeah.
And like, that's what's going on with your theater piece. And that's what's going on with many, many other things that we are doing, as both of us as individuals, but also in general in the world. Like everything has a kind of meaning, not because we bestow it, but because God has like bestowed some kind of meaning on it by loving us through these things.
And the opportunity for you to build a relationship and love the people that are playing Ultimate Frisbee with you, and to get to know them and enter into their lives, you know, that's also like where the gospel and mission is expressed, like in these little small things. Another just small memory came to mind that beautifully encapsulates this for me is just yesterday I was at rehearsal, and we're rehearsing in the basement of the theater, and like, you know, just concrete floors, walls, piping. Like, it's a drab room.
Yeah.
But it's big enough for us to rehearse in. And it's the sound of music. And so there's, the 7 young children, and one of the moms is, there on the sidelines, like, reading it, looking at the script, while her young child is, rehearsing and doing a scene. And it's a scene where, if you've seen Sound of Music, like, Captain Von Trapp hears his children singing, and his heart is moved and changes and kind of reopens himself back to Maria. And it's a beautiful little moment. And this was just like a rehearsal. And we're playing, like, the song is playing on a Bluetooth speaker in an echoey, terrible acoustic room. And I looked over her, and she was just moved to tears. I mean, she was just crying, and she was just like looking at the scene and seeing her son. And it was like she was having a profound experience. I even went up to her afterwards. She was just like, oh my gosh. She was like, his heart is open. Like, he's loving her again. Like, she was moved. And that was not even for an audience, but she had an experience. And, that might have affected the way she went home and loved on her kids and loved on her family and on her husband. And I don't know, but like that little tiny piece of art in a back room place of a rehearsal, not even for an audience, like, affected people.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good
and
testimony.
I think that's what, like, good art does. Like, we often, like, art is often like a social commentary or whatever it might be, like, but like, what does good art do? Good art reminds us who we are, and like that was obviously a case that reminded us who we were. And like, what I really like about La La Land is it reminds us of the importance of longing. And does it do that in like this way that like gives us a roadmap? No, it doesn't. Not by any stretch. But like, does it remind us to long for the things that are important? I think so. Even if it's doing so in a secular way. I think there's some good there. Yeah.
You were looking at your notes for themes that you had. Did you find?
Yeah, maybe just like one other theme that was kind of present was like, so we've got Mia early in the movie, Emma Stone early in the movie. She's auditioning, and she's one in like a bunch, right? Of like this redhead in like a white shirt.
Yeah.
And of course she had like the coffee stain, which was kind of funny. But then one thing that's happening near the end of the movie, she gets called for this audition, and they just say like, tell us a story, right? And she sings this song about her aunt in Paris and falling into the Seine, and which is like the central river in Paris, and it's like this beautiful little song, and the confidence that she expressed then, as opposed to early in the movie, was just like, and like the reason that she got the role was because she was able to like tell this story as if it were her own. Now, was the story true? It doesn't super sound like it. I don't think she.
I don't know.
Maybe, I guess her aunt, like she used to watch movies with her aunt or something, right? But like, I think there's something there for us to learn too, of like, what was the thing that made her dream happen? What was the thing that made her able to complete her mission? And I think it was being in relationship with Ryan Gosling.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was being in a relationship with Sebastian for these many months or whatever it was. And do we approve of everything about the relationship? No. Do we think it was a perfect relationship? No. Okay. But what was going on? I think there's a way in which we have to learn that being in a relationship, and an intense experiential relationship with other people, especially with family, especially with like whoever we're dating, and like our friendships and all these different relationships, they form us into a person that's ready to go on mission. And I think that, despite what the context of the rest of the movie says, that's a really important takeaway.
And certainly she was about to give up, if not for, his kind of go do this rehearsal, like quit being a baby, and that awesome little argument scene they have. So yeah, he certainly was inspiring her to continue on that mission, to prepare her well for taking that role. Yeah.
And I thought it was very beautiful that not only did like he step in directly to get her to the starting line, right, for this rehearsal, as our friends often do. But it's the experience of being with him and being with her family and being and having all this experiential knowledge from reading the book of life, right, that enables us to go on to this next step. Because I often think like, and I love watching movies. I love this movie. I love other movies. Recently watched Dune 2. Yeah, we don't need to talk about the movies that I've watched recently. But like the point is that like we live in a culture that's like we watch a lot of movies, we watch a lot of film, but there's sometimes that I wonder if we don't like sit on the sidelines a little bit too much in our relationships and like the way that we try to relate to others. And I think because they had this opportunity together of like going through this whole romantic experience in the film, even though it didn't work out, they were able to get this new experience reading what you might call like the book of life, right? Like actually living day to day in relationship. And like that new experience is what got them over the hump, is what got them to be able to do the thing that they really needed to do. And so the takeaway that I'm trying to say, I guess I want to clarify, is make sure that you're putting yourself in relationship in good ways, in healthy and loving relationships, because those loving relationships are what's going to make your mission clear and make you able to do it. Yeah.
And I would say primarily looking at what is your relationship with Christ? How is your prayer life? Is he animating you? Are you hearing his voice speak? Because otherwise, without that, we can find ourselves looking too much at what other people want us to do, what they like in us.
I think that's fair.
And like a prayer life must be stable for us so that we can have God's vision as our vision, so that we don't just take the vision of others. While community is necessary, also like making sure that the love of God is first and also then love of others.
Yeah. Agreed.
A piece on the final dream sequence kind of scene. She walks in, hey, let's go get dinner here, walks into Seb's jazz, and then she sees Sebastian playing, and she's with her now husband that she has a child with. What do you make of that final what if life could have been this way with Sebastian scene?
I mostly make tears. It was really beautiful, right? And you were like I kind of didn't like it, because as I was watching that scene, I was like, she needs to leave her husband and her kid right now and go be with
Kinda
Sebastian, because they were made for each other.
It makes you want to have that happen a little bit.
Yeah, I would say. But, and like, her husband isn't given a fair shake, right? Because like her husband
he's given nothing.
He's a totally flat character.
Yeah.
And like we've obviously grown with Sebastian and with Mia throughout the film. Yeah. So what did I make of it?
That'd be an interesting.
It was longing, and both of them choosing to acknowledge the longing and then put it back down seems mostly good. I don't know.
I think that the letting it go at the end was good, where there's kind of like this isn't going to happen. But I also, throughout all of that, I'm just like, is this being faithful? I mean, like, it's a weird on the balance of like, there's probably going to be moments where you might have like intrusive what if thoughts. But like, I think as a Christian, we're called, like, if you're married to somebody, like we are called to shut down any nostalgic, what if I could have gone and been with this person, and because I think that just is the grounds for like affairs to happen. Like with the Facebook culture, I think like growing, like I haven't done a statistical research on this, but what I've heard is that like since Facebook became a thing, like there's even more affairs that have happened because people are reconnecting with those long lost what if could have been high school
flames,
sweethearts and the old flames. And I see like that scene could deeply reopen sort of that, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, look, there's, Jane Smith. I haven't seen her since my crush that I had with her in high school, and what could have been, and life could have been this way, when all the while, like, you're being called right now to love the person you're with. Like, and so I think there's a great danger in that scene, on the one hand, of like, there's so much fantasy of what could have been. And, the number of stories you hear about men or women that do leave their families and divorce and then regret it. Like, I've heard personal stories from people that are like, that was the biggest mistake of my life.
Yeah.
And that they wanted to go back to their partner. Like, that scene could sort of build into that, right? Like, it could, I think, set a flame that ought to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or at least not like die, but you can still appreciate that which was in the past, and still have, like, I appreciate people that have been in my life previously, but I feel like there's just like ooh, man, was that infidelity in an emotional kind of dreamy fantasy-ish way? Good that she left, right? That was a good piece where he's like, do you want to stay for another one? And she's like, no, it's time to go.
Yeah.
I'm also kind of like, I hope they go home and talk about, all that she just encountered and maybe like experienced there, so that doesn't become a little secret place that she can get away to and go see Sebastian.
I would agree with you. Yeah. I think what you're saying is really true. And that, like, there's a way in which we can fan the flames of that desire, and that is not a good thing for us to fan those flames. And like, maybe that whole sequence was a fanning the flames. But I do think it's different to like acknowledge that the desire, like, kind of like you, and I think you touched on this too, like, that the desire, like, if I were to walk into that room and see Sebastian, and if I were Mia, I'd be like, whoa, there he is, the one who got away. And like, I would need a second to process that. And I think it's actually healthy to have a second to process that. Not to like look at everything that could have been necessarily. I don't think that's good.
Yeah.
It's like kind of the difference between like purity and lust, right? You look at someone, you're like, wow, that's a really attractive person. And then you can move on with your life, right? But like, you can acknowledge the thing and then set it down. But what I hear you saying is like, hey, once you acknowledge the thing, you shouldn't be dwelling on that thing anymore, right? Like, in their mind, they were going through all this baggage that could have been, right? And that desire for each other and dwelling in that, I think, would affect the desire for her husband, right? Yeah, and so I agree with you, but I really want to acknowledge like the healthiness of like seeing that something might be like an emotion arises in you, which you can't necessarily control, and then choosing to set it down, I think is a really healthy thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of their glance as she walks out, like, she lets her husband walk out first, and then she turns around to kind of have this private little nod.
Yeah.
With him.
Maybe not advisable.
Yeah. On the one hand, I see like, okay, they set it down and she leaves. On the other hand, that was a look of something. Like, there's like, if I ran into an ex,
introduce my husband to you.
Yeah, if I ran into my ex, I never would have taken a private moment to let my fiance walk outside, and then I like take a moment to have like a personal encounter or a glance with an ex.
Yeah,
that would be like, I'd be so in trouble.
Yeah,
like. So there is like a beauty that I think is good that you bring up of like, thoughts may come, process it and leave it and choose again your spouse.
Yeah.
And that was like, it was an interesting, like,
it was really raw.
It's raw, and I think it's too much. And there's a bit of like, that wasn't like, I'm not seeing you choose. It was just it was a weird gray.
And that's like a kind of like thing too, with it being a romantic musical or a romantic movie in general, is like, we often don't see in romantic movies like the couple just like breaks up and that's kind of it, right?
Yeah.
We always see like, oh, and the couple got married and lived like happily ever after. And this was like a unique film in that like the two protagonists, like they did split up, and then they like you're still rooting for them because you're most invested in their story. But I think there's something really healthy about like seeing in a film, yeah, the couple broke up. But I kind of wish they had left it as, and we broke up, and I love my husband now, you know, and I love my kid now.
Yeah.
Because I think it did lead to some confusion, and like the feeling in my heart about wanting them to get back together is like I know that's not like what is good.
Yeah,
right?
it's like I almost want to give an edit where it's like, okay, take all the movie as it was, and then instead of the 5 years later moment, we see what actually like maybe transpired. Like maybe it shows they separate, they go their separate ways. She meets this man, she falls in love with him, she builds a life, and we get to know that guy and his heart and how he's how he seems to be a good husband and a good father, and spontaneously taking her to this jazz place, and like we get to love him, you know, and we see the love they have for each other. Then show me that wispy, dreamy what if scene, and I think I'd see it a lot differently. I think I'd be like, whoa, Mia, what are you doing?
And let her
like,
look at her husband again with fresh eyes. Yeah.
And if it was kind of like, if we showed that scene from the husband's eyes, I think we would all not like that.
Yeah.
Like we wouldn't want that to happen. So I think that's like, because that aspect of it is removed, that the husband's perspective isn't really present as an invested, loving character. We're like, I want that. I want to see that.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and so like, I guess like the takeaway from this like part of our discussion is like, hey, we need to be careful with we're not really supposed to. Maybe I'm wrong on this, so feel free to correct me. But when it comes to our emotional lives, we don't choose the initial emotions that arise, except by the way that we tend to interact with them over time. Okay? So emotions arise in us, passions arise in us. And like what I think our job is to like acknowledge them and allow them greater or less activation in our brain, right? Mm-hmm. So like when I'm like excited about seeing a dog, but like I'm in the middle of a conversation with my mom, right? I can be like, wow, there's a dog. I'm really excited in my brain, but I'm talking to my mom. And so I acknowledge it and I go to the thing that I should still choose. So like, what is the takeaway here? I think the importance of acknowledging, but also not letting emotions override our thoughts, because the more that I think about something, the more that I'm going to desire it. Yeah. I think desire grows in that way. And I think it's important to just like, if St. Augustine's right and the Christian life is an exercise in holy desire, let's pay attention to what we're desiring and allowing to ourselves to dwell or ruminate on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might happenstance run into an ex, and it might produce a thought or a feeling, and you can say, that was a good person. They're a blessing. I pray for them that they do well. And then like set it down and pick up again with what is your current task? What is your responsibility? Who are you loving? Right now. And you don't have to then be like, like shame, guilt. I recognized that person was an important person in my life. Like it doesn't need to go immediately into shame for yourself, but just choose to set it down and move on. Yeah.
And I think maybe to just touch on kind of, as you mentioned, like that feeling oftentimes is a feeling of nostalgia, right? Mm-hmm. And like nostalgia is like, I would say perhaps the most powerful emotion. It's, and like, what does it mean? It means like a kind of pain, experiencing pain together with one's past, right? This kind of beautiful pain. Mm-hmm. And it's awesome. Like nostalgia is really cool, but it's always supposed to remind us of like nostalgia for Eden, nostalgia for our heavenly homeland, which is like the source of this mm-hmm. utter desire. So yeah, just like, acknowledge that like emotions aren't the end all be all of like our thought worlds, aren't the end all be all of ourselves. We're not limited to our emotions. We can choose how we interact with them, but just like know what emotions affect me and be able to change and like try to shape them in good directions.
And that nostalgia can lead us to prayer, but it can also be something very dangerous that could lead us away from our call.
Yeah. Amen.
To share, I think my final piece on nostalgia is just the power of nostalgia with music.
Ooh, yeah.
I just and I got to hand it to while I don't fully support and agree with maybe that maybe final what if dream sequence, man, it does a great job of showing the fantasy of nostalgia and what if because all that she's dreaming would not have happened. She dreams of oh, what if I did my one woman show and the audience was packed? Well, it wasn't.
And
so,
he was there.
And he was there. Well, it's even if he was there, it wouldn't have been a full house. I mean, those were fantasies. They weren't reality. They do a great job presenting that feeling of just nostalgia. Maybe that's not a great nostalgia to sit in, but some good nostalgia that I've felt in my life is I grew up playing Shadow of the Colossus and Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. 2 games that are not perfect, and I'll eventually probably give a podcast episode on them. Lots of beauty, lots of part of the stories that I'm Shadow of the Colossus. You yeah, some weird demon stuff. Not at all great, bad. But man, the music in those games, when I hear them, my heart is awakened with a kind of nostalgic wonder that nothing else has awakened in me. Because I experienced it as a kid, or Spirited Away. That movie for me is just wow. And I have just had cathartic moments where I have sat with those soundtracks in prayer in the car, just from driving, and just my heart has been awakened with dreams and desires and longings for God.
Yeah.
It's so and cathartically beautiful.
Music unlocks that in some kind of crazy way.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool.
And La La Land shows that well with starting that scene. He plays the da-da-da-da, and it just activates so much. So I'd say find what are those songs for you maybe that's it activates a beautiful nostalgia that orients you towards perhaps the good, and you can give that to God. I think is a beautiful thing to look for and perhaps use in your prayer. Take whatever that nostalgic thing is and bring it to Christ, and let it set your desires aflame for Him and for what your mission is, and just to be with Him in that beauty. He is there in that is awesome.
And I would totally agree. I think using music, especially in that way, is awesome. I can still think of some songs off the top of my head that are just that just it kind of gets me to that place. But I would also maybe offer a kind of added challenge, bonus round. What would be cool is if you could activate nostalgia through silence. This musical nostalgia you're thinking about, that's just the way that I love the Lord, this song makes me long for Him. What if you could learn to let silence be that song? And this is a podcast called Media Mystics, and I'm not trying to dunk on media or anything like that. But if you can learn to enter that sacred space that music often brings us to without music, you will be very free.
Yeah.
You will be very free.
I like that challenge.
Yeah.
Not to diss the use of music, but there's a sacredness to silence.
Yeah. Yeah, very true.
I'm reminded, this is the last thing I really have, I think, just to share to any people who are animated and wanting to be musicians like this. I think I just read one of the coolest conversion moments I've seen lately from media.
Okay.
And real life scenario. I want to read this.
Yeah, please.
In my desire to find more gamers, I went to Reddit, to the Catholic gamers Reddit subreddit, and I sent this
There's
to
a
myself.
Catholic gamers subreddit.
There's a Catholic gamers subreddit.
I should have assumed.
And
that's awesome.
Somebody, I just went there, had posted this. This is a comment on a YouTube video. The YouTube video is a Kyrie. So Kyrie eleison is a part of the Mass in which we ask for forgiveness from Christ. Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, translating to Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy. Well, there is a Kyrie on YouTube made by Martin O'Donnell. I think it's, Martin O'Donnell, forgive me. Yeah, Martin O'Donnell. Martin O'Donnell, if you don't know, is the composer for the Halo soundtrack. If you have ever played Halo,
What?
he is the amazing man. Talk about nostalgic music. Martin O'Donnell has captivated the hearts of every man that's played Halo. I mean, every woman. I mean, it is beautiful music. And here is an awesome comment on this video, which is one, wild that Martin O'Donnell, composer for Halo, made a Kyrie mass part. But this is a comment on it that was posted a year ago. And this is on that subreddit. It says, Martin, I just want you to know that your music is what led me to Christ. I grew up playing Halo, being 7 years old when Halo Combat Evolved released. I absolutely loved the series' music, and it stuck with me over many years in an indelible way. I felt something stir in my soul that no other music could accomplish. I attended my first Catholic Mass in my late 20s and fell in love with the church after hearing those beautiful Gregorian chants that had been buried deep in my mind for so many years, and I finally converted from my lifelong agnosticism. Your music planted the seed in my young heart to find God, and I owe you, quite literally, my eternal thanks. You helped save a soul in a way. Thank you for sharing your gifts with the world. And Martin O'Donnell replied and said, wow, I just saw this. Thank you for sharing your story. I just converted to the Catholic Church after 2 years of RCIA at Easter Vigil last week. Please stay in touch.
That's insane.
That's the greatest thing I've ever seen. Like,
oh my gosh,
I can't even,
love that.
Whatever La La Land and the nostalgic use of music can do for us, it exploded in that man's comment. And that, talk about what can music do for you. And that's not the only story I've ever heard of that, but it's the only one that I've ever seen about Halo, which is amazing. And Halo is based in this Gregorian chant music. So, wow.
Yeah.
Power of nostalgic music that brought that man to the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Thought that was a beautiful summary.
Yeah,
of what we're talking about.
I love that. Yeah, to choose music that either motivates us to virtuous action or choose music that raises our hearts and our minds to God through longing and through beauty. Yeah, that's good stuff.
And thank you, Sebastian, in the film for helping us appreciate more of jazz. I will now have a deeper respect
it just
for
hits
jazz.
Different.
It is.
I look forward to maybe you and I can go to Indianapolis Jazz Kitchen and think of Sebastian fondly.
I would love to. And that's a cool thing that this movie has done. It has awakened for me a longing for music in a different way.
Yeah, would agree. Well, I think that's all we've got.
Yeah.
So you wanna pray?
Let's conclude in prayer.
All right. Very well.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let us just take a moment to recognize what are the desires on our heart. Holy Spirit, reveal the deepest desires of our heart to us in this moment. Jesus, we ask you to help us pay attention to our desires, our true deep desires that lead us to authentic love, to authentic relationship. Help us cast aside all of those desires that are being twisted and are leading us to bad habits, to sin, and destructive choices for ourselves and for our relationships. Set aflame the longings of our heart to long for you, for love, for family, for service to the poor, for relationship, for mission, for humility, for simplicity. Awaken in us the desire to be great saints. And may all the saints intercede for us, especially Blessed Carlo Acutis, Blessed James Alberione, St. John Paul II, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Dominic, and the Holy Family. pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Go forth and read John Paul II's Letter to Artists. I would recommend if you want to explore this and look into his time in rhapsodic theater. I was just reminded of, I don't know if you're familiar with his time in theater, but during the Nazi persecution, instead of taking weapons, he did small little plays. Those would be two things if you're intrigued by what we've talked about today. John Paul II's history of the rhapsodic theater and his Letter to Artists published in the 1990s. Explore those.
There will be a lot of stuff in the show notes today, so make sure you click through that, and feel free to support us on Patreon if you'd like, or just support us through your prayers.
Thank you very much. God bless. For every work of art we talk about in this podcast, we also have prayerful guided meditations available based on that work of art in the Mystic Moments playlist. We invite you to join us for prayer. Also, a like, subscribe, a positive review, and especially supporting us on Patreon helps us dedicate more time to this ministry. Please send this episode to anyone you think might appreciate it. God bless.